All right, Grace Church friends, this is a wrap up from Phil Hunt's sermon on Sunday, May 28th, 2023. Of course, I was there listening, and by God's grace, I was able to hear it 3 times. But he preached a sermon called Living When Dying is Gain, Philippians 1:18 to 26. And the idea that that shapes all of our view of life and death, this passage, and how do biblical values shape your view of life and death, and what influence does that have even on your being on mission for Jesus in your life? When you live when dying is gain, it affects the way you make decisions. And how did that shape the way Paul processed his decisions and evaluated his life and ministry? And you can see that in a lot of places in the scriptures. But when you live when dying is gain, to me, to live as Christ and to die as gain, it shapes your life and ministry in 3 ways, as Phil brought out. First, it gives you great courage. We saw that in verse 20. And then you magnify Christ. We saw that in verse 20. And then you desire to be with Christ, verses 22 and 23. So let's look at that just for a moment. He says this. Here's what Paul says. As it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not at all be ashamed, but that with full courage now, as always, Christ will be honored in my body. So the idea that there's great courage, but also that Christ would be honored, that Christ would be magnified. And then in verses 22 and 23, he says this: if I'm to live in the flesh, to live on in the flesh, if I'm to keep living here, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet which I shall choose, I cannot tell. I'm hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ. He says, to be with Christ is far better. He said, far better. So the idea is that you desire to be with Christ. Now, if he keeps you here living on earth, you serve him to the best of your ability with the strength that he supplies. Why is this biblical view of life and death so critical to reaching our world with the gospel of Jesus Christ? Because if we don't have this kind of view, we're going to be anchoring our soul in shifting sand. We're going to be trusting in things that crumble. We're going to be, spending our time and our efforts in things that don't last for eternity. Word of God and people will last forever. Let's spend our time in whatever calling in life we have. Mom, dad, brother, sister, student, worker, teacher, classmate, teammate, all the things you do in life. There's so many things. We all have a calling from God in life. In every one of those realms, believer, bring Jesus and the gospel to bear. What does the word of God say? How does the gospel transform this? And then what you'll notice is you will have courage. You will magnify Christ. You will desire to be with him.